Good morning. Great. To those of you here in the sanctuary and also to those online, welcome and thank you for being here with us this morning. Welcome to the Universalist congregation of Flint. One of the reasons I'm at home here at UU is our strong affiliation with social justice. What a joy it was seeing members of our congregation last week meet the challenge of our presenter David Malik's offer of black willow trees, available to be planted here in Flint, with all the coordination and effort that entails. Cool. Your enthusiastic response was amazing. And personally, I'm a very political person who strangely enjoys knocking on doors, speaking to strangers for a cause or a candidate. I'm proud of our national UU The Vote program that seeks to vote love and defeat hate by organizing on the state and local levels to fight for fair elections. And there's more, hold on. They also, fair elections, advance voting rights, protect abortion access, and resist the targeting and criminalization of Black, Indigenous, and people of color in the communities. And how about that vote in Kansas this week? Let us strive to address the current threats to our democracy and human dignity. We working? Okay. Be more like Kansas and less like Texas. That better? Good one to get louder on. If you would like more information about Unitarian Universalism or our congregation, please feel free to contact one of our ministers, our office, and that contact information can be found at uuflint.org. The announcement, if you want to enjoy our region's best musicians and enjoy them for free, don't miss our next Joy Brewer coffee concert. Please note the free snack food is first rate too, thanks to Ken at Good Beans. It happens on September 4th, 5 p.m., features Ben Turner organ trio. I also do a quick shout out to join us August 28th and learn about and discuss the book Defund Fear, Safety Without Policing, Prisons and Punishment by Zach Norris. And he demonstrates that we've been conditioned by what he refers to as architects of anxiety. And if you want to read that book before, see us for more information, and there will be a discussion at the end of that service. And I just happened, a little blurb, I happened to catch the NPR program this morning, Throughline. It was at 7 a.m. And I'd like to recommend today's program featuring Nicole Hannah-Jones, who we got to see here in Flint at the Capitol Theater, creator of the 1619 program, as a guest. And before we light our chalice, here's a very special announcement that we make frequently, and it's also on our website's homepage. Our congregation acknowledges that...
My problems, I'm not hearing anything out of that mic.
I turned that off. I turned that one off.
You turned it off?
The one on the floor. Wasn't the feedback coming through that?
Testing. I don't...
Has that been turned off under here?
Oh, no. It was that was mic working just a minute ago. No, that should be on.
Too strange.
And I moved it. Should I move it back?
No, that shouldn't affect it.
Our congregation acknowledges we stand on the traditional lands of the Council of Three Fires and the Anishinaabe, who are indigenous inhabitants of Michigan. I'm thankful for the support given by the Native American communities to Flint during the water crisis, and for the honor accorded to Flint people I knew that traveled and stood with the Standing Rock Sioux tribe. Our congregation supports indigenous-led organizations and grassroots change movements, and we encourage others to do so as well. Now for our chalice lighting. May we open ourselves ever more fully to the eternal mystery which lures us onward towards life and creativity. May we find the courage to live our faith, to speak our truth, and to strive together for a world where freedom abounds and justice truly does roll down like water. May we know the fullness of love without fear and the serenity of peace without turmoil. May we hold one another in the deep and tender places with compassion. May we grace one another by sharing our own vulnerabilities, being ever mindful of the divinity within that makes soulmates of us all, like Carol Meyer. Now, if you please recite our covenant with me. Recognizing the richness of diversity, the beauty and wonder of shared worship, and the transforming power of love and service, we gather as a sacred and intentional community to freely seek knowledge and truth, to celebrate the fullness of life, and by our actions to increase goodness and justice.
Good morning. Our opening words are a prayer for summer. For the long hours of daylight, we are thankful. For gentle mornings before the heat, and for nighttime conversations in the cool of the evening, we are grateful. For friends and family, gardens, and all manner of plants and creatures, we rejoice. May we love this earth and dwell wholeheartedly in it this summer's day. Amen. And I'd like to have you please note that the hymn that we are about to sing is on your blue sheet that's attached to your order of service. That hymn will make sense, I'm sure, with the sermon. After our words of meditation and silence today, you're invited to light a candle of joy or concern, either up front or in the back. And you may also write in the book in the rear, and that will be then placed in the weekly e-update. And if you are at home and want to join us, get a candle ready, and you may light it at home. Our words of meditation today are quotes from a genuine, made in America guru, Joseph Campbell. He strongly resisted the idea that he was a guru, however, thereby proving to the satisfaction of many that he was. Here are those quotes. "The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek." We're not on our journey to save the world, but to save ourselves. But in doing that, you save the world. The influence of a vital person vitalizes. "The fates led him who will. Him who won't, they drag." A bit of advice given to a young Native American at the time of his initiation. As you go the way of life, you will see a great chasm. Jump. It is not as wide as you think. How to teach again what has been taught correctly and incorrectly learned 1,000,000 times, that is the hero's ultimate difficult task. Most people, when they sit down to eat, they thank their idea of a God for giving them food. Indigenous people thank the plants and the animals they are about to eat. God is the experience of looking at a tree and saying, "Ah." May we remember the wisdom of all people, well known or not, as we go about our daily activities in the week ahead. Let us now enter into the silence.
Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz has been active in the international Indigenous Peoples movement for over 40 years. Our reading today is from her best-selling book, An Indigenous Peoples' History of the United States. The United States is not unique among nations in forging an origin myth, but it is one of the few states founded on a mythic story from the Hebrew Torah. The myth-maker of the Torah, known as the Deuteronomist, put the words right into God's mouth. See, I have set the land before you. Go in and take possession of the land that the Lord swore to your fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and to Jacob, to give to them and to their offspring after them. Other states, founded on this exceptionalist, God-ordained ideology, include Israel and South Africa, and their similar mistreatment of indigenous people is a matter of fact. It is interesting to note that from the very beginning of our country and up to this day, people look at the origin myths of the so-called primitive indigenous people, and they think of them as quaint, endearing, fantastic stories not grounded in reality. Yet, many U.S. scholars seem unable to objectively examine their own nation's convenient founding story that says, in effect, take whatever you want. We're going to do a sing-along, and you'll find the lyrics on the back of your order of service. Give me that old-time religion. It was written by Pete Seeger, and Joseph Campbell often quoted it.
Please join in this next song. The words are in the back of your order of service. Give me that old-time religion. Give me that old-time religion. Give me that old-time religion. It's good enough for me. Let us worship Aphrodite. She is beautiful but flighty, and she doesn't wear a nightie, but she's good enough for me. We will pray to Zarathustra. We will pray just like we used to. I'm a Zarathustra booster, and he's good enough for me. Give me that old-time religion. Give me that old-time religion. Give me that old-time religion. It's good enough for me. We will pray like those Egyptians built pyramids to put our grips in, cover us up ways with inscriptions, and that's good enough for me. We'll do dances to bring water, prepare animals for slaughter, sacrifice our sons and daughters, and it's good enough for me. Give me that old-time religion. Give me that old-time religion. Give me that old-time religion. It's good enough for me. Amen.
Obviously, Dan could not be with us in person this week, but we can enjoy him on video, nevertheless. Perhaps some of you have had the experience of being in a movie theater when the hero finally succeeds, or the good guys, surrounded by the bad guys, are saved by the approaching cavalry charge. Suddenly, the audience erupts in a spontaneous cheer, and it feels so good to be part of that celebration. I don't think this happens much anymore, and I'm guessing only older people remember something like this. In 1916, this happened when 12-year-old Joseph Campbell was at the movies watching a cowboys and Indian film. Of course, young Joe Campbell was not your usual 12-year-old boy having a good time at the movies. Even at his youthful age, he had already studied the sad history of the white man's treatment of Native Americans. Then, up on the big screen, a blue uniformed horse soldier was chasing down an Indian to kill him. And the audience started to cheer for the white man, the white soldier, in one loud voice. Young Joe stood up in the middle of the theater and shouted, "No, you don't know what you're doing. You wouldn't cheer if you did." Can you imagine what people thought of this odd little boy who didn't know how to enjoy a movie about heroes and villains? In 1916, he was probably one of the few people in the theater who truly knew who was the hero and who was the villain. Joseph Campbell would spend much of the rest of his life standing up in front of crowds saying much the same thing. Look carefully at the stories you live by. They have power, the amazing power of myth to move people for good or for evil. In our reading this morning, the well-known historian of Native American cultures, Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, explained the power of America's founding story, what we might call our misguided American myth. It is a Judeo-Christian myth, familiar to anyone who knows even a little bit about the Bible and the history of the expansion of the United States. Like the Israelites of old, being led out of Egypt by Moses to a promised land, Americans have been told from day one that the North American continent was their promised land. Like the Israelites, they would also have to be God-fearing so they could win the land from the indigenous so-called savages. It is a simple, memorable story with clear good guys who deserve all the good stuff and clear bad guys with no real God who deserve death. As it reads in the book of Joshua, "And the Lord gave them rest on every side, just as he had sworn to their ancestors. Not one of all their enemies had withstood them, for the Lord had given all their enemies into their hands." This was the corrupt, self-serving myth of our nation's founding. For most of our country's history, few challenged this belief. But Joseph Campbell stood up in the middle of the American movie and said, "If you believe it, you don't know what you are doing." It was as though he arose from the dead, more powerful than he was in the flesh. Campbell died in 1987, but in 1988, the public broadcast system aired 6 episodes of Bill Moyers interviewing Campbell. The interviews had been recorded back in 1985. It remains one of the most popular series in the history of public television. Millions were introduced to his idea by the broadcast, The Power of Myth. It was a broadcast you might logically assume to be a really boring subject, comparing the myths of different religions. But for those who had the ears to hear, it was anything but boring. When Campbell died, Newsweek magazine noted that he had become one of the rarest of intellectuals in American life, a serious thinker who had been embraced by the popular culture. Campbell had even been criticized by some of his professor colleagues for being a popularizer. A popularizer is evidently what academics call a professor who knows how to educate a large number of people without boring them to death. Joe didn't seem to care about the criticism. As a second-generation Irish American, his favorite saying was, "Is this a private fight or can anyone join in?" He joined in, and he was no ordinary Joe in a fight. It seems he had command of his whole brain, while most of the rest of us have to make do with just one half of our brain. He played the saxophone, piano, banjo, mandolin, and ukulele, and not just a little. He had his own ensemble and made a living while in college with his musical talents. He was a world-class half-miler for the Columbia track team, and he ran on the 1925 All-American team. He could have competed in the 1928 Olympics, but his love of learning sent him on a different quest. He went to study in Europe, and he learned to read Sanskrit, German, Old French, medieval Latin, and Provençal, the language of the troubadours, the storytellers of old Europe. That was appropriate. Because of all of his many gifts, his greatest gift was his ability to tell stories. Like the shaman storytellers of ancient times, he knew how to hold the attention of those sitting around his campfire, and he told them stories that spoke of the true promised land. And how did the life-giving myths that Campbell chose to call heroic, how did they differ from the corrupting myths we might entitle, "I'm special and this is my promised land"? Consider the prime myth of the Blackfoot Indians. It is the story of Buffalo Wife, and it is here told in part in the words of Joseph Campbell. When the buffalo first came to be upon the land, they were not friendly to the people. When the hunters tried to kill some of them by driving them over a cliff for the good of the villagers, they were reluctant to offer themselves up. They did not relish the idea of being turned into blankets and dried flesh for the Blackfeet to eat. No, they said, "We will not fall for your tricks." So when the hunters guided them towards the abyss, they would always turn aside at the last moment. It seemed the villagers would be hungry and cold in the coming winter. One morning, a daughter of the tribe's greatest hunter decided she would do something about this. She went to the base of the cliff, looked up, and began singing in a low, soft voice the words, "Oh, buffalo family, if you come down and feed my relatives in a wedding feast, I will join your family as the bride of your strongest warrior." To her surprise, they all began coming over, falling and dying at her feet. Then the fallen shaman buffalo of the herd arose from the dead, walked over to Hunter's daughter and said, "Okay, girl, off we go." "Oh, no," she says. "Oh, yes," he says. "You made your promise. We've kept our side of the bargain. Look at all my relatives here, dead. Now off we go." Well, her family gets up in the morning and they look around for the girl. They see the hoof prints on the ground and, well, you know how Indians are. They know she has gone off with the buffalo. Her father takes off after her, but after going a long distance with no success, he sat down to rest. Lucky for him, along comes a magpie, one of those clever birds that has shamanic qualities. The wise bird tells the father, "There's a lovely girl with the buffalo right now, over there, just a bit away." "Well," says the man, "will you go tell her that her daddy is here at the buffalo wallow?" So the magpie flies over there, and the girl is sitting among the sleeping buffalo herd. He whispers to her that her father is over at the wallow waiting for her. "Oh," she says to the bird, "this is very dangerous. These buffalo are going to kill us. You tell him to wait, and I'll be over if I can work this out." Well, her buffalo husband is right behind her. He wakes up, takes off one of his horns, and tells her to go get him a drink from the wallow. She goes to the wallow, walking nonchalantly. Her father greets her, takes her by the arm, and says, "Let's get out of here." But she says, No, the whole herd will be after us. Let me go back so I can smooth things over and work this out with them. She takes the water back to her buffalo husband, who immediately smells her father's scent on her. He gives a buffalo bellow, and his whole herd does a slow buffalo dance with tails raised, and they go over and trample her daddy to little pieces. The girl starts crying, and her buffalo husband says, "So, you're crying for daddy, but what about us? There are all my children at the bottom of the cliff, our wives, our parents, all dead, and all you can do is cry about your father?" Well, apparently he was a compassionate buffalo. He finally softened up and he said, "Okay, if you can bring him back to life, I will let you go." So she turns to the magpie and says, "Please, pick around and see if you can find even a little bit of daddy." The magpie does it and comes up with just one little vertebrae. She puts it on the ground under a blanket and sings a revivifying, magical song of great power. Presently, there's a man under the blanket, and soon her father stands up. The buffalo are amazed, and they say, "Well, why don't you do this for us? We'll teach you our buffalo dance, and when you kill us, do this dance and sing your song, and we will all come back and live again." What a difference your mythology can make. Like many myths of America's indigenous people, this story is about serving each other and honoring the earth's creatures. Our hymn this morning spoke of everlasting arms to lean on. A mythology that gives people truly everlasting arms to lean on does not promise the arms of some imagined grandfatherly God that gives you just what you want. The arms are instead made of the life-sustaining joy we have when we respect, take care of, and share the earth, its life, its waters. The Indian maiden didn't make a deal to get more land. She made a promise to worship life, even though her people had to take life if they wanted to eat. Joseph Campbell found such mythic stories are everywhere, worldwide. They are myths that identify the individual, not just with their local group of, for example, Israelites, or their favorite Indian-killing blue-coated soldiers. Instead, they speak of heroic individuals, learning and then teaching others that all of humanity and the earth's creatures are of one tribe. They are stories about a promised land. And it is a promised land that belongs to everyone who learns they must share the goodness of the earth. And in that realization, they become a hero like those in 1,000 myths. Remember the words of young Joe at the movies? No, you don't know what you're doing. Too bad someone like Joe Campbell wasn't around to shout out those words in 1542. 570 years ago, the Catholic Church took the malevolent myth that a God wanted the Israelites to take a promised land from the villainous Canaanites, and they made it into a law for their own purposes. It was called the Doctrine of Discovery. And it said in effect that the new Israelites, Christians that is, owned any new non-Christian lands they might discover. That included most of the earth, of course. Our own nation's Supreme Court in 1832 quoted that 1452 Doctrine of Discovery, saying it proved Indians had lost their rights to sovereignty as independent nations and retained a mere right of occupancy in their lands. Isn't our Supreme Court an amazing institution? In this case, it turned a doctrine of greed based on a myth of greed into a law supporting greed. Myths that instead speak of unselfish giving come from our inner wisdom that is a force of evolution. Such myths often come to us in dreams, dreams that have forever moved humans to ever greater compassion. But the myth of a promised land that belongs only to one self-proclaimed superior culture, that myth comes from the dark side. It is nothing more than thinly disguised greed. The results of these self-serving, man-made myths are obvious. For just one example, now in the news, consider the history of the government-run Indian boarding schools in the United States and Canada. In the 19th and early 20th centuries, there were 350 government-funded and often church-run Indian boarding schools in the United States. There were 139 in Canada. Indian children were often forcibly abducted by government agents and sent to schools hundreds of miles away. Many of them never made it back to their home. They were beaten, starved, or otherwise abused when they spoke their native languages or practiced their native religion. In 1892, the headmaster of the Carlisle Indian School described what they wanted to do. He said, "A great general has said that the only good Indian is a dead one. In a sense, I agree with the sentiment, but only in this, that all the Indian there is in the race should be dead. Kill the Indian in him and save the man." Such ideas and actions are made possible, perhaps inevitable, when people in power choose a myth that, as Campbell said, corrupts the whole world. But now, thanks in no small part to Moses Joe and his many followers, people are looking carefully at the myths they live by. In 2012, the United Methodist Church formally denounced the doctrine of discovery. Today, progressive Christians everywhere see it for what it is, a justification for selfish land grabbing and genocide. And better news still, a recent Gallup poll shows that only 20% of the people in the U.S. say they view the Bible as the literal Word of God. This is a record low, and a record high of 29% of Americans agree. Much of the Bible is only a collection of fables, legends, and questionable history and the moral precepts of long ago. In other words, fewer people are praying to Aphrodite or Yahweh or Zarathustra just the way they used to. The selfish myth of the exceptionality of Christianity is far from dead, though. When Pope Francis went to Canada recently to apologize for the church's role in this cultural and sometimes actual genocide, he did not denounce the doctrine of discovery. He did not denounce the source of the problem, a Christian church that still proclaims to be the only way to God. Frank Etawagashik, director of the United Tribes of Michigan, knows that the Pope did not go far enough in his apology, and he isn't going to let it slide. Lynn and I spoke to Frank recently, and he was the one who reminded me of the doctrine of discovery. We were talking about his tribe's stance on a woman's right to get an abortion, which he supports, and then our talk turned to Indian boarding schools and the Pope's visit to Canada. He quickly told the whole story of the doctrine of discovery and how the Pope did not admit that their story of a promised land that belongs only to white Christians has caused death and destruction for centuries. Frank Etowagashik frequently speaks in our nation's capital, and you can bet he will tell his story there, his myth to live by, one that will bring new life to our nation. Truth-telling, no matter how painful for some, always does that. This morning, we read our acknowledgement that we are on Anishinaabe land, and that is a true, life-giving story we try to live by. From ancient times, the Anishinaabe believed and still believe that storytelling is one of the most important aspects of life, and that stories themselves create the world. That is, of course, the essence of what Joseph Campbell proclaimed for the sake of today's world. For those of us who want to create a new world that will right the wrongs of the past and make the future brighter, our way is clear. Like Joseph Campbell, when someone tells a story about heroes who are really villains, we will stand up. We will stand up and tell the story of a promised land, the one that comes to those who know we are one people on one planet who need each other desperately. Thank you.
The sermon reminded me of a camping trip out west. We drove way out of our way to a historic buffalo jump. Not a typical tourist site. There was nobody there but a prairie dog colony and one hungry badger. Prairie dogs had the advantage, I can tell you. But indeed, it did feel like a sacred space. Gratitude. Gratitude bestows reverence, allowing us to encounter everyday epiphanies, those transcendent moments of awe that change forever how we experience life in the world. Sarah Von Branach. I believe a grateful spirit leads to joy, and joy in turn leads to acts of respect and courage. May this community always be a source of respect and courage, a place to nourish our dreams, ideas, actions. Your gift of time, talent, monies demonstrates your belief in the vital values and message we share here. Your gift makes you part of a larger group and strengthens the faith community. It's easy to give. You may place your offering in the basket at the back of the church, use a QR code on the back of your order of service, or for those at home, donate at uuflit.org. Thank you for your generosity.
I do want to acknowledge the Brighton congregation was with us today, and we want to say hello and thank you for being with us. Earth, teach me freedom as the eagle which soars in the sky. Earth, teach me regeneration as the seed which rises in the spring. Earth, teach me to forget myself as melted snow forgets its life. Earth, teach me to remember kindness as dry fields weep with rain.
And let us extinguish the chalice. We extinguish this flame but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.